Judah was under siege. The northern Israelites had fled south en masse. Hezekiah had to hold the kingdom together. It seems his priests collected the slightly different northern and southern versions of Israelite history, and also wrote a new one to try to reconcile and unify the two traditions. These various texts were later to become part of what we know as the Old Testament. Hezekiah's situation would explain the importance of portraying David and Solomon as having once presided over an empire of all Israelites, based in Jerusalem. To promote unification, it seems Judah also now underwent a major religious purge. It appears worship began to be centralized in the capital. Half a millennium after the supposed time of Moses, this was the real beginning of monotheism, the belief in one God alone. The biblical account of Hezekiah's purge, more reliable because it was closer to the events, describes the destruction of idolatrous shrines.
And Hezekiah did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. He removed the high places and brake the images.
The new centralized cult in Jerusalem was focused on a special local Israelite deity, probably as a way of rallying people behind the king and getting them to identify with the state. That deity was called Yahweh. We know him from the Bible as Jehovah, or more simply, God. By the late 7th century, Assyria had withdrawn from Judah. Hezekiah's great-grandson Josiah now appears to have begun developing ideas of expanding Judah. To rally his population behind him, he redoubled and intensified the centralization of worship around Yahweh.
In order to achieve the ideas of extension, territorial extension, and so on, Josiah needed centralization of power, strong administration, complete control of the state. One way to do that was to centralize cult, to do this reform of cult, which would lead back to the idea, to the pan-Israelite idea, that all Israelites must worship one God, that is the God of Israel, in one capital, that is Jerusalem, in one temple, that is the temple of the God of Israel, under one monarch, one king, the king of the lineage of David. That was the pan-Israelite idea, which came into being in the 7th century BC.
At this time, Josiah's priests are said to have discovered a lost text which greatly emphasized the worship of Yahweh. They called it the Book of Law. It was almost certainly the Old Testament book that became known as Deuteronomy.
The book of Deuteronomy perpetrates one of the great reformations in history. It imposes a strict philosophical monotheism that banishes all other gods from traditional culture. This was part of a reformationist program in which King Josiah attempted to centralize not only power, but the ability to reach the realm of the divine into his own hands in Jerusalem, in the temple which sat in the backyard of the royal palace.
So somebody, a person or a group, sat down at that time and wrote the early core of the story. And the story serves Judah. It puts Judah in the center of the universe.
Deuteronomy was hugely important for Western civilization because for the first time, the individual was singled out from the crowd as the focus of moral responsibility and duties. Baruch Halpern believes this was actually connected to the earlier Assyrian attacks on Judah.
Many elements of the reform actually precede the reform. They're the result of the exile of the rural population of Judah in 701 BC by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. The extended family essentially disappears from the landscape of Judah in the 7th century after 701 BC. We no longer have compounds housing extended families. We have individual houses. We no longer have collective tombs containing hundreds of people being buried together. We no longer have large cooking pots. We no longer have large ovens. All these things shrink down in size, as they do in other cultures when the extended family disappears and the nuclear family becomes the center of organization and identity. Effectively, what you see in the 7th century BC is the development of individuality.
These social changes were reflected in radical new laws in Deuteronomy. An ideological change of great enduring consequence.
There's something else about Deuteronomy which is remarkable, and this is what we can call today the ideas of civil rights, of rights of the individual, of the person. I mean, Deuteronomy is full of ideas how to protect women, children, slaves, people who lose their land, the simple people. It was probably one of the ways to attempt to mobilize the people of Judah behind the ideas of the new reforms, because they give them, the rights, if you wish, for the first time.
This pottery fragment from Josiah's time records a petition from an unknown agricultural laborer against his local commander.
What it testifies to is a new consciousness at the end of the 7th century, in the time of King Josiah, even among simple agricultural workers, that the power of the governor was subject to some greater laws, some greater morality. And it's here on this broken piece of pottery, as archaeological evidence from the time of Josiah, that what we now still believe as biblical tradition and biblical morality was born among the people in the fields of ancient Judah at the end of the 7th century BC.
What you have here is a case of the rejection of tradition. It's not the invention of tradition, it is the rejection of tradition. And that is the mindset, the self-conscious mindset on which science and monotheism and Western civilization have been founded.